I am truly honored to be here this morning. I want to talk to you a little bit, short period of time, about your legacies. Webster defined your legacy as money or material possessions left over to someone by will or bequest. But I want to tell you this morning that your legacy will never be about money or material possessions. It will have everything to do with your character and your leadership abilities. As leaders in this organization, you paint a picture every single day by the things you say and the things you do of your character. But the greatest portrait of your character is those things that you say and do when you don't think anybody is watching you. Your leadership abilities are those things that you want people to remember and say about you, those honorable things that you want your children and other people to emulate and pass on to their children and others. In other words, your legacy. Leaders think differently. They have this unique mental attitude that comes from an internalized discovery of self. And I call this strong, powerful, confident concept self-awareness. This strong, powerful concept, confident concept, was drawn out of me at a very early age by two of the greatest character developers that I have ever known. These two men saved my life. And I would like to share how that happened, what they did. I grew up in poverty. I'm the middle child of 8 children, would have been 9. I had my youngest brother died 2 weeks after giving birth. My mother worked as a domestic all her life. She cleaned houses for a living. If you ever saw the movie The Help, that's what my mother did. My father worked as an attendant at a humble full-service service station on Main Street in that little bitty town in Andrews that I grew up in. The 10 of us, including my mother and my dad, lived in a 3-room, not bedroom, house that sit on cinder blocks. There was no indoor bath facility and no hot water. When we wanted to take a hot bath, we heated the water up on the stove and poured it into a number 5-foot tub. The majority of our food came from government subsidized programs. The majority of our clothes came from those homes my mother cleaned. I remember having 3 shirts and 3 pair of pants. They all had that, you remember those iron-on patches? Some of you do. My mother put iron-on patches on those jeans and those shirts. We got shoes every 6 months. I remember as a child cutting cardboard out to put it in the soles of my shoes to keep the heat of the pavement out in the summer, water out when it rained, and cold out in the winter. I remember my mother lining us up for school. And she would place these dry meat and bread bologna sandwiches in a brown paper sack and give us 2 cents for milk. The hardest part of the day for me in elementary school was walking into that cafeteria with that bologna sandwich in that bag. I literally ate that sandwich under the table. I would take a bite, I would keep it under the table, and I would take a bite of it when I didn't think my classmates were looking at me. Walking around with patches on your clothes and holes in your shoes and carrying those bologna sandwiches left me with very low self-esteem. And that low self-esteem reflected in my grades. Every report card that I received in elementary school was filled with C's and D's and F's, more D's and F's than anything else. I remember the last day of elementary school vividly. I walked home and I told my mom, I am never, ever going back. I hate it. Making that statement to my mother was like pouring water on a duck's back. It meant nothing. You don't raise 8 children in poverty and let them come home and tell you what they're not going to do. So I knew after I made that statement, when the summer was over, I was going to line up just like before, with my brothers and sisters, just like little ducklings, and head off to school. And that's what I did. The first part of the day was just like any other day. I hated it, absolutely hated it, until I walked into Mr. Hake's, Mr. Clyde Hake's fifth period science class. I'm standing in the doorway, and I'm looking for my favorite seat in the corner in the back in the dark. Mr. Hake is at his desk with his head down. Mr. Hake, 5'8", medium built, dark brown hair, deep blue eyes. He looks up and he gets up and he says, "Oh, you must be Nathan." Small town. He comes over to me and he said, "Nathan, I heard a lot of good things about you." And he shakes my hand with this smile on his face, puts his other arm around me, and he walks me to the classroom, and he's talking to me as he walked. And he finally says to me, "Nathan, we have arranged seated in this classroom, and this is your desk." He pointed to a desk that was directly in front of his desk on the front row. And fear just enveloped my body. I had never, ever sit on the front row. I wasn't a front row, front desk kind of student. That's the reason I got to class early every day, so I could go hide in the corner, in the back, in the dark. I wasn't going to ask any questions. I wasn't going to raise my hand or answer any. It was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But Mr. Hake had a plan, and he carried that plan out to perfection. Every single day that I entered his classroom, he had a handshake, a smile, and an encouraging word. Mr. Hake was the kind of teacher that would be in a room filled with students, and all of them would feel like they had a private tutor. I left that day feeling special coming out of Mr. Hake's class. The last class of the day was 7th grade football. I'm lined up outside with all the other 7th graders, waiting for the coaches to come out. And out comes this big giant of a man, 6'4", Coach Mark Wallace. Light brown hair, but this hair was all over his body. And he walks up and he starts shaking hands. And then he gets to me and he said, "You Hearne?" "Yes, sir." He said, "I heard you were a good athlete." He said, "Hearne, you're going to be on my team, and we're going to have some fun winning football games." I went home that first day of school walking on a cloud. 2 teachers had affirmed me in the same day. That had never, ever happened before. I couldn't wait to get back to school the next day. Mr. Hake and Coach Wallace, every single day, had an affirming word, and encouragement for me. I took to that like a duck to water. But they just weren't doing it for me. They were doing it for every kid at the school. We all loved them. The 6th week of junior high school, I played a game. I'm 62 years old, and I'll never forget it. Coach Wallace. Scored 4 touchdowns, rushed for like 200-something yards, intercepted a pass on defense. After the game was over, this 6'4" bear of a man comes up to me, and he hugs me. And he looks down at me, and his favorite word is, "I knew you could do this." And he looks down at me, and he said, "Hearne's that outstanding, but I knew you could do this." And then he backs up, and his wife is standing there. And she comes over and she hugs me. And she tells me I'm wonderful, and she's beautiful. And she teaches at the school, and no one looked like that ever hugged me and told me I was wonderful. It was a great day. That was on a Saturday. On Monday, I'm sitting in Mr. Hake's 5th period science class. He walks by my desk and puts my report card face down. I turn that report card over, And I have an A in science. The very first A that I can remember getting in public school. He walks around and finishes putting the report cards out. And then he comes back and he stands directly in front of my desk. And he says, "Nathan, stand up." I stood up. He said, "Boys and girls, I need your attention." He said, "On Saturday, Nathan," and he told him all about the game. And he was the kind of mentor that he had surprises for you. And I never saw him there, but he had to be there because he knew everything that I did. And when he finishes, he says, "Nathan is not only an outstanding football player, but he's an A student in this class. And for his outstanding efforts, I'm going to make him my lab assistant in this class." Guys, I'm standing there in front of the room, dumbfounded. And he says, "Nathan, stay right there. Don't move." And he goes to the back of the room, and he goes into a closet. I'm standing there with this deer in the headlight looks at my, because I don't have a clue what a lab assistant is. He didn't share that with me. He comes back to the front of the room, and he has this white bundle folded up. He stands kind of slightly behind me, and he unfolds it. It's a brand spanking new white lab coat. He puts that lab coat on me in front of my classmates. It's in my size. And I look down, and he's written my name on the pocket. Standing there in front of my classmates, in that moment, literally changed my life forever. I would never be that same kid who walked into that classroom from that elementary school. Because of his affirmations and encouragement in that classroom, I came to a self-awareness that those C's and D's that I made in elementary school was not an indication of my intelligence. From Coach Wallace's affirmation of me out there on that field, I came to a self-awareness that those clothes that I had on, with the patches on them, the holes that I had in my shoes, and those bologna sandwiches, was not an indication of who I was going to be. You know, there were fringe benefits. Walking around in that lab coat, helping folks with their lab projects, it made me a chick magnet. You know, guys, it doesn't get any better than that for a 12-year-old in the 7th grade who grew up in poverty. Grew up in poverty. I continued to make good grades. A kid who had nothing but C's, D's, and F's on his report cards. I went from having more C's, D's, and F's to making A's and B's, not only in Mr. Hayes' class, but all my classes. I went from being this kid who had the strong desire to drop out of school. I hated school. If my mother was alive today, she would tell you she had to beat me every day to go to school. I went from being that kid to now having a dream, a desire, and a goal to be a science teacher and a football coach. Those men saved my life. I continued making good grades. I went to high school, made the honor roll, graduated from high school, received an academic athletic scholarship, went to college, graduated from college, came back and taught science and coached football for 25 years in the public school system. And the only reason that I went into teaching and coaching was to walk out those men's legacy. You see, what I wanted to do, what was all inside of me, was every student that came into my biology class, I wanted to give them that white lab coat experience. Every player that I coached on that football or whatever field they were on, I wanted to give them that Coach Wallace big hug and that wonderful phrase, "I knew you could do it." In 1991, we won our 6th state championship at Permian High School, and I left and I went into administration. My second year as an administrator at the school, I was named the outstanding principal of Region 18, which covered 22 counties. They sent me to Austin, Texas to accept the award from the governor. After I came back from Austin, Texas, they put a little blurb of me receiving that award in the local newspaper. 2 days later, my secretary, Mrs. Alice Mosley, walked into my office, and she said, "Mr. Hearne, you have a visitor." I was shuffling papers, and I didn't look up. And then all of a sudden, I felt this presence over me. And it was Coach Wallace, but he wasn't coach anymore. He was the deputy superintendent of that school district that I had graduated from. And you know, when you see somebody like that who's so powerful in your life, I just jumped up to shake his hand. But he brings that 6'4" frame around my desk, and he puts his arms around me and he hugs me. And he looks down at me and he says, "Hearne, we read about you in the newspaper. I thought I'd come by and congratulate you. We're proud of you." And that old phrase, I knew you would do this. And guys, I was just overcome with emotions. In his arms, he's hugging me. I felt just like that 7th grade football player all over again, being affirmed. And I couldn't stop crying. I cried like a little baby for 30 minutes. The most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me, what I thought at that time. I'm 62 years old now, and I cry every day. My wife, our hobby is going to the movies, and whenever I see scenes like that, she pulls out a box of Kleenex for me. You know, when you're walking out this legacy, God will always send you affirmations if you're doing it the right way. A phone call, a card, a text message, a personal visit. I want to share a couple of those affirmations with you today that I've just recently gotten. When my wife and I came up to the meeting for Candy and Tony, Tony walked in, we hugged, and he sat down, and he began to share stories about me coaching him as a sophomore in Permian High School. And he shared this situation with me. And the memory started flowing back. He said, "Coach, do you remember that that conditioning drill you had called snakes?" I remember that vividly. What would I do is that I'd bring them all into the main gym. And then some days when I wasn't feeling just real happy to see them because we had lost, I would just point. And they knew what that meant. That meant that they ran out of the main gym, up into the stands, and they would go up the stairs, down the stairs, up the stairs, down the stairs, go across on the other side, go up the stairs, down the stairs, up the stairs, down the stairs. And they would continuously do that until I got tired. This was before practice. It was brutal. But Tony, he could do it all day long and never break a sweat. I remember hearing one day the upperclassmen started razzing him about it. They started telling him, "Karimi, slow down. You're making us look bad." And when it was over, he walked in, came into the gym, and I said, "Karimi, come here. Don't you ever let anyone dictate your behavior on this team. You have a gift, and I want you to use it every single day." You see, when you're a legacy builder, you have this conviction and this belief in you, and you want to pass it on to benefit someone else. And that's all I wanted from him. I wanted him to use that gift and not ever let anybody take it. I was just passing on what someone passed on to me. After he told me that story, he paused. And you heard him. He said, "Coach, when you spoke to me in the gym that day, said those words to me, it inspired my life." It doesn't get any better than that, guys. when you're trying to walk out a legacy? The second thing, affirmation that I received. I got this text, and I had to put it into a letter because I'm getting so old I can't see that phone. I'm glad Tony took those phones from me, because I've been trying to read it. I got this text from our fullback that played on the 91 state championship team that went 16-0. He rushed for 1,800 yards, scored 2 touchdowns, received a scholarship from Baylor, graduated from Baylor, played in the NFL 4 years and 2 years in the Arena Football League. That young man had some strongholds in his life. He started out losing significant people in his life at 10 years old. He lost his stepfather in a domestic violence accident in Odessa in a nightclub. He lost his mother at 12 in a head-on collision on Interstate 20. At age 17, he lost his granddad. At age 21, he lost his mother. Every significant person in his life was gone, and he was filled with rage. He was fighting every day, and almost at age 17, a man almost killed him. I would talk to him every single day. Son, you have the tools. God has blessed you with the tools to be successful. Please don't let this rage take your life. He wrote me this text, and I'd like to read it to you. He says, Coach, I want to apologize for not being able to make the event I deeply wanted to come, but was held at an oral location until about 11 o'clock. I was asked to go back to Odessa, Texas to do a book signing, and I also spoke at the college. He said, I ordered your book, and it actually arrived the day that you spoke. I almost finished it that night, and the crazy thing about it is I had to be at work at 4 a.m. the next morning. It was well past 12 o'clock when I started reading. I just finished it today and felt like it was a very good and heartfelt book. You helped me in so many ways, in so many things, not only myself but other athletes. As a kid looking up to you, I can honestly say that you would embody what I wanted to be as a man. At all times, you carried yourself with dignity, respect, and grace. And it showed by the way you communicated and interacted with us. I can honestly say that without you, I honestly feel that Hearne may not have had a chance or an opportunity to win as we did. I'm not trying to be biased when I say that, but without your assistance, guidance, and active involvement with us, I feel that the discipline and the willpower to grow from boys to men would have been absent or fleeting at best. I know that I was personally responsible for many of the gray hairs on your head. And I would like to personally thank you and let you know they were not in vain. With your help and guidance, I found my discipline and focused my goals. I also learned self-control, responsibility, and most of all, pride in and all that I do and achieve, whether it was on or off the field. My apologies for not being in touch as often as I needed to be, and I would truly hope that this text finds you in good health and spirit. God bless you, Coach. I never knew. That young man felt that. He's 39 years old. Never knew. When you're walking out the legacy, it never stops. It never stops. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 1 says, a good name is better than precious ornament, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. I'm going to interpret to you what that's saying. The day that we die, they're going to put a tombstone on our graves. And on that tombstone will be a date of birth, a dash, and a date of death. And I would like to think that that dash represents our legacies. And when you're walking it out, when Tony came into that office and he told me, he hugged me, called me coach, and told me, Coach, what you said to me inspired my life. Tears welled up in my eyes. But that statement just made that dash on my tombstone a little deeper. When I received this letter from Malcolm Hamilton, his words again made me cry. And my dash just got a little wider. The affirmations from those young men, I can say this without the slightest bit of hesitation. Because of their affirmations, my day of death will be much better than my day of birth. When I coached at Permian High School, those 10 years, that school was at its apex. From 1965 to 1995, we had a winning percentage of 88.9. Figure that up. In 1972, they built the stadium, Ratliff, that would seat 20,000 people. From 1972 to 1975, they filled that stadium to capacity for 25 years. We had people from all over the state of Texas coming to view that program and the nation. I remember a small crew, coaches coming in from East Texas, and they wanted to see our off season. And when they finished, one of the coaches stopped me and he said, "Coach, this Hearne tradition here is so strong. It's so thick, you can cut it with a knife." He said, "These kids," he said, "I've been looking at these kids and they truly believe that they're supposed to win a state championship every single year." And then he looked at me with excitement in his voice and excitement in his eyes. He said, "Coach, that's what we want to build in our program." He's talking about that Mojo legacy. When my wife and I walked into Park Place Mercedes in Grapevine, Texas, and we walked into that showroom, and we saw the aesthetics of that showroom and that service department. And every single employee came by us with a big smile on their face and asked, "Can we help? Can I help you?" And my wife looked at me and she went, "Wow." And I looked at her and I said, "This tradition of excellence is so strong and so thick, you can almost reach out and grab it with your hand. There's not a dealership in America who does not want to emulate that." I'm talking about the Park Place legacy. The shortest distance to a great legacy is service. Your legacy will never be measured by how many people serve you. It will always be measured by how many people you serve. The greater your service, the more valuable you are to your company, your community, and your family. As leaders in this organization, and you walk out this legacy every day, it will never be you just doing it. You will always feel what you do. And that passion will inspire you and motivate you to develop a tradition that will continue long after you're gone. You're never going to stay in a place forever. You get new jobs, you move on, you die, you retire. Your legacy will never be about what you're moving on to. It will always be about what you're leaving behind. I asked Tony and Candy, I said, "Can I share my faith?" And they said, "By all means." This is the most important thing about me. And it comes from 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. And Peter said, "Every good and special gift you have received from God." And I'm looking at a room filled with people who have a good and special gift from God. Every good and special gift that you have received from God should be used in service to others. Thank you.